Good afternoon and welcome to the local review body for the 27th of January 2025, our first one for this year. Let me first of all introduce the top table. I am Councillor Bob Braun. I'm the convener of the local review body. I have with me today on my left Councillor Keith Allen and on my right Bailey Claire McLaren. We are all by necessity members of the Planning and Placemaking Committee. To my far right is Mrs. Leslie Tierney. She is a planning advisor to the LRB. She has not been involved in any of these cases prior to them being pushed to appeal. To my left, beyond Councillor Allen, is Mr. Colin Elliott, who is our legal advisor for today, and beyond him, Miss Audrey Brown from Democratic Services, and that is the top table. Members, may I ask now, item 2, do we have any declarations of interest? Bailey McLaren.
None, convener.
And Councillor Allen.
I have none as well.
Thank you. We have the minutes of the last meeting, which I will approve, as I think I was the only one of us who was on that meeting, so I approve the minutes for the meeting on the 16th of December 2024. So that now leaves us on to the first item on the agenda this afternoon. This is item 4.1, which is the erection of a dwelling house in principle, land 40 metres southwest of Witch Hill in Canoe Terrace in Perth. Mrs. Tierney, if you could introduce this for us.
Thank you, convener. So we'll just run through some slides first before the other presentation. So location of the appeal site here, centre of Perth, east side of the river, just to the east side of Dundee Road. And then we'll just kind of start zooming in on the location of the site. So you can kind of see it sandwiched between Dundee Road at the bottom end of Canoe Terrace there and just beside Canoe Primary School. And then looking in a bit more closely again, across Dundee Road, Canoe Parish Church as well. It's kind of a rocky outcrop, former quarried area. Witch Hill, the property called Witch Hill, is the house just to the top of the image there, just to the north side of the site. And then we have some drawings that were submitted with the application. So red line site boundary, just coming along Canoe Terrace into a shared area, a new access created into the site, and then down towards Dundee Road, and you'll see the indicative position for the house just at the front of the site there, which is forward of the building line at Witch Hill. And then some indicative other drawings submitted with the application. This is a section through the site, from the top of the site, Canoe Terrace, down to Dundee Road. And then another couple of indicative drawings from looking towards the site from Dundee Road, and then another sectional drawing to the bottom there. These are obviously sketch proposals, indicative, because the application is only in principle. And then this is an indicative kind of street scene, if you like, with Witch Hill, the proposed dwelling house, and then the school on the other side. And then we've got some photographs of the site. So this is taken from Dundee Road with Witch Hill, the existing dwelling house, and then the application site, effectively in behind the trees, where the blue arrow is. And then looking along Dundee Road behind Canoe Primary School, can't quite see Witch Hill, but you can see the location of the site atop that outcrop behind the trees. And then again, another couple of images from across the road and from the other direction. And then we'll start to look a bit more closely at the site. So you can kind of see the rocky outcrop. The blue arrow is the indicative position of the house, or where the site is. The green arrow is the proposed access into the property, vehicular access, which is currently just a pedestrian access really to what was formerly garden ground associated with the Witch Hill house next door. And it kind of runs down along the edge, and then the orange line is the back of the site effectively. Next slide. And then this is just a view, so you can see the back of the primary school and the kind of playground at the bottom there, the edge of the site, and the approximate position. Then this is kind of coming round towards the rear of the primary school. The area that this is taken from is kind of communal turning area, just at the top of the site there. And then this is just the building and the trees that exist around the top of the site. And then this is the boundary to Kinnoull Terrace. This is the junction with the existing road that then leads on to Kinnoull Terrace. And then as we travel along Kinnoull Terrace, and then the photograph on the left is looking from the application site back along Kinnoull Terrace. The one on the right is from Kinnoull Terrace into the access point to the site. This is the neighbouring property, Witch Hill. This is just to give you an indication of the kind of wider character and amenity of the site with the views over the city. And then this is round the front of the property. And then from the same site, kind of now looking towards the application site. And then a little bit more closely into where the site is from the neighbouring Witch Hill. And then this is now into the application site boundary. The kind of hedge there is the mutual boundary. And then you can see the position of the house behind the trees. And then this is as you come round again towards the primary school side. The line indicates the boundary of the site with the arrow locating the approximate position of the house. Then this is now looking back towards Kinnoull Terrace back up the hill. So again, that orange line indicating the boundary of the site, the green arrow where the access would be created, the vehicular access into the site. And then this is just looking more closely at that point of access back to the shared area at the rear. And then again, back onto the Kinnoull Terrace side, adjacent to the house, the existing house, where the access would be located and the house. And then just a couple of more distant views with the boundaries, the access point where the green arrow is and the site where the blue arrow is. This is the communal area at the rear, so this is shared with the occupiers of Witch Hill, so obviously there's some kind of bits and pieces associated with the general use of the house in there. And again, just another view of that area. And then looking back to the access onto the end of Kinnoull Terrace. And then these are just a couple of more distant views. This is from the other side of the primary school looking across. It's a little bit blurry, but you can see where the trees are, the application site and Witch Hill to the side. And then again, just from the back of the primary school looking through and across. So planning permission in principle is sought for a site 40 metres to the southwest of Witch Hill House, which is a Category B listed villa in the Kinnoull Conservation Area. The proposed development site measures around 620 square metres and historically formed an area of garden ground to Witch Hill. The site is prominently located on a rocky outcrop to the west side of Dundee Road, adjacent to the Category C listed Kinnoull Primary School. Indicative proposed site plans and elevations show a two-storey property. Vehicular access would be taken along Kinnoull Terrace, which is a private road, to the public road at Bowerswell Road. Indicative parking provision for 3 cars is shown. The site has an extensive planning history, with 6 planning applications from the same applicant having been refused on the site between 1996 and 2016, and there have been 5 dismissed appeals. So the reasons for refusal: firstly, due to the elevated position and prominent location, development of the site would adversely affect the density, character and visual amenity of the existing area and would not contribute positively to the surrounding built and natural environment. As such, it would be contrary to Policy 1A and 1B, B and D, placemaking, and Policy 17, residential areas of the Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan 2, and Policy 14, design quality and place of MPF 4, which seek to ensure development is compatible with the amenity and character of the area, considers and respects site topography and important views, together with respecting an existing building line. Secondly, the proposed development does not respect the historic pattern or density of development in relation to adjacent residential properties and would result in development that would detract from the residential and visual amenity of the character and appearance of the Canoe Conservation Area. The proposal is therefore contrary to Policy 27A, conservation areas of the Perth and Kinross LDP2, and Policy 7, historic assets and places of MPF 4, which both seek to ensure that the architectural and historic character of conservation areas is preserved or enhanced, including protecting existing cultural heritage from inappropriate development. Thirdly, Policy 28A, conservation areas of the Perth and Kinross LDP2, requires that development in a conservation area is subject to submission of a detailed application and an appropriate design statement. The indicative plans are of poor quality and the design statement is inadequate, as it does not explain and illustrate the design principles or how the proposal has been developed as the best response to the context. The proposal is therefore contrary to PAN 68, design statements, Policy 28A, conservation areas, and Policy 2, design statements of the Perth and Kinross LDP2. Fourthly, the proposed development encroaches on the setting of Category B listed Witch Hill and will have a detrimental impact on its setting and on other neighbouring listed buildings. The proposal is therefore contrary to Policy 28A of the Perth and Kinross LDP2, historic assets and places, and Policy 7, historic assets and places of MPF 4, which seeks to ensure that the setting of listed buildings are safeguarded and that cultural heritage is protected from inappropriate development. Fifthly, no information has been submitted to assess the impact on biodiversity and protected species from the proposed development, and no information has been provided as to how the proposal will enhance biodiversity. The proposal is therefore contrary to Policy 41, biodiversity of the Perth and Kinross LDP2, and Policy 3, biodiversity of MPF 4, which both require proposals to demonstrate that they will protect and enhance biodiversity. 6, insufficient information has been submitted to assess the impact of the proposal on existing trees, and as such it is contrary to Policy 40AE and 40B, trees, woodland and development of the Perth and Kinross LDP2, and Policy 6, forestry, woodland and trees of MPF 4. And finally, approval of the application would constitute an increased risk to pedestrian and traffic safety due to the substandard access from Canoe Terrace onto Burrows Wells Road. The proposals are therefore contrary to Policy 60B of the Perth and Kinross LDP2 and to Policy 13B, sustainable transport of MPF 4, as the transport requirements and the impact of the proposed development have not been fully considered and addressed. So in terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, the application seeks to establish the principle of erecting a dwelling house on land within the Perth settlement boundary where Policy 17 of the Perth and Kinross LDP applies. This recognises that residential development within existing settlements can often make a useful contribution to the supply of housing land, but acknowledges the potential conflicts new development can have with the existing built environment. Proposals will be encouraged where they satisfy the criteria set out in policy, in particular criteria A, infill residential development at a density which represents the most efficient use of the site while respecting its environs, and C, proposals which will improve the character and environment of the area. Policies 1A and 1B, placemaking, are also relevant, and these require proposals to contribute positively to the surrounding built and natural environment and respect the character and amenity of the place. and development should also have a design, density and siting which respects established character. The indicative proposal for a two-storey building sited in front of the rear building line of Canole Terrace is unlikely to respect the character of the place or contribute positively to the surrounding built and natural environment. The application is in principle with limited detail provided, and as such it's not possible to fully evaluate the potential visual impact of the proposal. However, as with previous applications, indicative sketches have been submitted to accompany the application. These highlight the significant adverse visual impact that would be likely to be experienced by such development on this site due to the elevated nature of it in front of the rear building line of Canole Terrace and within the conservation area. There was previously concern expressed that any scale of building, even single storey, would have a detrimental visual impact on the character of this sensitive area, particularly if some of the large trees are removed as part of any detailed submission. Policy 27A listed buildings states that there will be a presumption in favour of the retention of listed buildings and protection of their settings. And similarly, Policy 28A conservation area states that the council will encourage proposals which preserve or enhance the character or appearance of the conservation area. Witch Hill House is a Category B listed villa in the Canole Conservation Area, part of the Victorian expansion of Perth, characterised by large villas and substantial garden grounds. The proposed development site historically formed an area of garden ground to Witch Hill, prominently located on a rocky outcrop. The unusual streetscape here contributes to the setting of the adjacent listed buildings, including Canole Primary School and Parish Church, as well as to the character and appearance of the conservation area. The garden of Witch Hill is noted in the Canole Conservation Area appraisal as being bounded by a mature tree belt, which contributes positively to the character of the area. Development here has the potential to detract from the residential and visual amenity of the conservation area due to the site's existing character, its elevated location, and its proximity to a number of prominent listed buildings. A statement has been submitted with regard to the existing trees on the site. Policy 40, Forestry and Woodland Strategy of the LDP seeks to ensure that trees in conservation areas and trees on development sites are safeguarded in accordance with British standards. The information submitted is not fit for purpose and doesn't comply with British standards or Policy 40B. The applicant suggests that the height of the existing trees will be reduced, but no indication is given as to how this will impact the health of the trees and whether it is feasible to carry out development close to them without undermining their health. Policy 41, Biodiversity, requires the Council to protect and enhance wildlife and habitats, whether formally designated, protected or not. There are mature trees and other vegetation on the site, and no information has been submitted to assess the impact on biodiversity from the proposed development. Vehicle access to the site is proposed via Canole Terrace, which is a private road. Vehicles would join the public road at Bowerswell Road. Objectors note that there are no suitable turning facilities for large vehicles, such as refuse lorries or for delivery vehicles. Transportation and Development note that the width of Canole Terrace at the end is around 7 metres, which makes turning, especially for larger vehicles, very difficult, thus compromising on pedestrian and vehicle safety. In terms of the applicant's case, this proposal conforms to the development plan and MPF4 because this seeks to greatly increase the number of homes within 20 minutes accessed by non-motorised modes to services and facilities. Housing density in this area is far below that specified in the local plan, but there are very few vacant plots. The application was referred to a transport officer for comment, although it complied with all national, regional and local aims. Although PKC's official transport policy includes a hierarchy of 5 modes with walking at the top and car use at the bottom, the transport officer does not mention this. Instead, they say there are inadequate sight distances at the nearby junction. The officer did not say what the traffic volumes are on Bowerswell Road, or that as a narrow road, corresponding speeds are low. Given the proposed house is very close to many destinations and its occupants would probably include children, the likelihood is that most trips would be on foot or cycle, and bin lorries safely reverse onto Canole Terrace. With regard to local character, Only 11 people objected to the proposal in an area housing several hundred, and there is no reason to believe that this opinion is widely shared. PKC is building a new road over several miles of open countryside, so the effect on local character will be hundreds of times greater than this development. There are several buildings which are very different in style, so there is no overall unity. Views northward are closed by Potter Hill Flats, and those to the south by traffic lights near the hotel. In what ways a two-storey house with a footprint of around 130 square metres and hidden by trees could have any effect on the locality is not understood. Even if the trees were removed, the visual impact of the house would be tiny. The officer says the plans are inadequate, but they are only indicative and were accepted as valid, and a design statement was not required. A plan showing where trees would be removed, retained, cut back or planted was supplied. The location of a possible fish pond would attract many insects. The position and design of the house shown are such that solar gain would be significant, while trees would protect the site from cold winds. The property is very private, not being overlooked and secure. There are extensive views and a vast amount of external open space, and it is believed that it might be possible to create a stairway from the site down to Dundee Road. There's now a housing crisis. Prices and rents are far too high for many. Homelessness is at a record level. 20% of children experience poverty and thousands live in substandard dwellings. Levels of physical and mental health are too low. The planning system was established mainly to help address the need for more homes and better health. These should still be among its main concerns. The new community plan describes the many social issues now existing, including the needs of the increasing percentage of elderly people. And just in terms of other matters, the 14 representations that were received, 2 were letters of support, 1 was a general comment, and the other 11 objected, raising concerns about visual amenity, contrary to the development plan, access and road safety, lack of parking, impact on the character of the conservation area, and being visible from the A85 and Tay Street to the front of the building line, impact on trees, impact on the setting of a listed building, drainage issues, history of refusals, proximity to the school, lack of potential garden ground, precedent for other similar proposals, impact on protected species, lack of information, contaminated land, and no consideration of disabled access. I think there was also some contributions required for education and transport.
Thank you for that. We'll open up for questions. Councillor Allen.
So, thank you, convener. Biggest concern is the proximity to the road and not in line with the current character and buildings that are already there. Is that generally something that we would use? Is that something that comes under policy 1A and 1B?
Yes, councillor. I think in this case, what you're looking at is whilst it's part of a wider residential area, it's also a conservation area in this area as well. So obviously the pattern of development, the density of development, those kind of things are very much things that would be part of any assessment in terms of MPF4 and your LDP policies.
Madam McLaren.
I don't have any questions. You know, the presentation has been detailed and answered most of my concerns, all of my concerns.
Thank you. I just have one question. This is to do with the Canal Terrace and the exit onto Boswell Road. Obviously, other houses use that junction at the moment for vehicles. But am I right in saying we have to look at any new build based upon our policy now for traffic rather than the existing usage?
Yes, convener. You know, there is an existing situation. It may well not be too standard as it is. So any new proposal would have to be considered on its own merits as per current standards.
Fine, so we have no further questions. Members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Allen
I'm happy to go ahead.
and Bailey McLaren.
Happy to proceed.
I too am happy to proceed. So this occasion, I'll start us off. This application, as we've seen, has a considerable amount of history behind it. All of the previous applications, which date back many years, have all been refused. Some of those have been appealed to the reporter, the DPEA, and all of those too have been refused. So I think although the reasons slightly vary, I think it indicates that this is a site which is going to would be very difficult to develop for housing, if possible at all. The reasons for refusal, which are in our papers here, are detailed. They are a part of our existing policies, which is Local Development Plan 2 and National Planning Framework 4. And any new application must work to the current policies that we have. Looking at the comments of the officers, it seemed there is no adequate design statement included. There is no information of assessment of biodiversity, which is required, and there is insufficient information to assess the impact on trees. All of these factors we would require, even at an in-principle stage. We could, of course, defer for that information to come forward, but I'm conscious of the other reasons which have been given here, and there are 7 of them. Which I think will be very, very difficult to overcome, to be honest. I visited the site myself just a few days ago, and it is a difficult turning to exit from Kinnaul Terrace. There are no visibility displays as we require today, and I appreciate other people use the junction now who live there, but as I've asked them questions, we have to judge this on today's policies. Given all these factors, given the factors in the officers' comments and their reasons for refusal, I find myself in a position where I have no choice but to refuse the appeal. Councillor McLaren, Bailey McLaren.
Thank you, convener. You've laid out a lot of my thoughts there, so I won't repeat. This is an elevated position within a conservation area that sits close to a List B building and a List C building. Therefore, as pointed out, we have to consider the impact on these buildings. So I too would agree with our officers and uphold the refusals for all the reasons stated in the paper. And they've been quite clear. So I'll agree with the officer.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, convener. Took quite some time to read through the paperwork, and I have come to the conclusion that most of the things I've read through the officers and their proposals are correct. I'm concerned, as I said earlier, with my one question about the actual positioning of the house. I think that large vehicles, whether that be removals, lorries, fire engines, bin lorries or whatever, they're going to have a real difficulty in that area as well. And on that basis, I think it's only correct to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous decision to refuse with the reasons for refusal as given in the papers.
Yes, nothing really more to add, convener. It's page 29 and 30 of your papers, and you've not suggested any changes to these 7 reasons for refusal.
So, I think, I think so. Were you the applicant for this? You were the applicant. Yeah, I'm sorry on this occasion we've refused the appeal. Okay, sorry. We can't. You can't address the. I said we've refused the appeal. We've refused it unanimously, I'm afraid. That's our decision. Sorry. So members will now move on to the next item. on the agenda, which is number 4.2. This is the change of use of flat to short-term let accommodation unit at 4A Breadalbane Terrace in Aberfeldy. Mrs. Tierney, if you could introduce that one. So, Mr. Monroe, we finished now, so would you like to leave? No. I'm sorry, you can't address the committee. I appreciate you're upset by it, but the decision's been made. Thank you. So we'll now move on to item 4.2. The change of use at 4A Breadalbane Terrace, Aberfeldy. Mrs. Tierney, if you could introduce that for us.
Thank you, convener. So just run through some slides to start with. So location of the appeal site here, where the yellow star is. So it's just eastern entrance to Aberfeldy, just off the A827, coming towards the town centre. And then we'll start to zoom in on that. So you can see the A827 is Breadalbane Terrace, the terrace of properties, residential properties in this area. And then some of the plans that were submitted with the application. So site location plan, which shows the application site outlined in red. And then we have a floor plan of the property with the 3 bedrooms. And then for noting, because it's also contained within the appellant's statement and is of relevance, is the extract from the local development plan for settlement of Aberfeldy. So the main thing to point out is the location of the property, where the arrow is. The yellow area is the defined town centre. So obviously the appeal site is just outside that. The white areas is just generally speaking the wider residential area within Aberfeldy. There are some other annotations there in terms of open space and the dotted blue line and so on for the conservation area. And then this is something else that was taken from the appellant statement, just to explain that in a picture rather than the words submitted, is the edge of the town centre shown with the red line around the bottom left-hand corner there. Obviously you can see the appeal site outlined in red in the middle. But the other 2 areas to note being the townhouse hotel on the corner in orange, and the business park just to the top right-hand corner of the slide there. And then just some images of the property. So first floor flat within that yellow square. So that's the front of the property facing on to the main road. And then this is the view from just the opposite corner on the other side of the street. So you can see the hotel there on the corner, and then the row of properties in Breadalbane Terrace itself and the appeal site within the yellow rectangle. And then just starting to look more closely at that, ground floor flat is accessed by the red door on the front of the property. The appeal property and the 2 flats upstairs are accessed through the pedestrian pend where the blue arrow is. And again, so we can just see that the appeal site on the first floor with number 3 on the bottom and number 4B and 4C on the top floor. And then this is now from the rear of the property. That's through that pend that leads through from the street. And then this is looking at the rear of the property, so within the yellow rectangle. And then again, just from this, the communal area at the rear of the property, so you can get a better understanding of the other residential properties in that area. And then this is looking in kind of both directions around the rear, which is where all the bins and some of the green space is located. And then now looking at the property itself, so the door to the property is to the rear, where the blue arrow is, and that takes you up to the property and the 2 flats on the top floor. Internally, we've got the 2 flats on the top floor to the right-hand side and the door to the appeal site on the left. And then this is just to give you looking in the kind of opposite direction from the rear, so you can see the edge of the appeal site in the yellow area on the left photograph with the hotel just on that corner. And again, a kind of distant view of the appeal site from the car park associated with that commercial property. So by way of introduction, the property is a first floor 3-bedroom flat which would be converted to a short-term let accommodation unit at 4A Breadalbane Terrace in Aberfeldy. The flat is located within an attractive stone-built, slate-roofed, C-listed 3-storey block dating back to 1880. The block lies within the settlement boundary of Aberfeldy and the Aberfeldy Conservation Area. It is also approximately 63 metres northeast of the town centre. Breadalbane Terrace is part of the A827 main road leading into Aberfeldy from the east. A neighbouring building to the southwest is occupied by the Townhouse Hotel. There is no designated parking for the property, but there is on-street parking for residents and others on Breadalbane Terrace. Pedestrian access to the property is through a pend to the rear where there is a door to the internal stairway. 4A is the only property located on the first floor and visitors do not pass any neighbouring doors to access it. The residents of the 2 top floor flats do pass 4A. The reason for refusal, the proposed change of use is contrary to policy 30E, tourism of MPF4, as the proposal results in firstly, an unacceptable impact on local amenity and character of the area, and secondly, the loss of residential accommodation where such loss is not outweighed by demonstrable local economic benefits. And the proposal is contrary to MPF4, Policy 14C, Design Quality in Place, and Perth and Kinross LDP2, Policies 1A, Placemaking, and Policy 17D, Residential Areas, as the short-term let accommodation adversely impacts on the amenity of neighbouring residents, and the short-term let use is not compatible with the amenity and character of the residential flatted block and surrounding predominantly residential area. So in terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, in respect of criteria 2 of MPF4 Policy 30E, the proposal would result in the loss of a flat to short-term let accommodation in an urban location. It is also acknowledged that the Council's housing strategy have undertaken consultation in respect of the introduction of a short-term let control area. However, no such control area has yet been formally designated. It is also acknowledged that economic benefits can derive from small-scale short-term let accommodation, which provides access to a range of attractions and activities for business and leisure guests alike. As such, the loss of this 3-bedroom flat in Aberfeldy to STL accommodation would not have a significant impact on the availability of residential accommodation in the local area. Notwithstanding this, the proposal, by virtue of its location in a residential building within an area which is predominantly residential in character, conflicts with MPF 4 Policy 30E1 Tourism and the intent of LDP 2 Policies 1A Placemaking and 17 residential areas. In terms of residential amenity, it is acknowledged that short-term lets can result in additional levels of disturbance and noise concerns, and that the primary avenue to regulate such matters is via the separate licensing regime. A recent appeal decision from the DPEA elsewhere in Perth and Kinross at Burnham indicated that management guidelines cannot be relied upon to restrict or control the adverse impacts on neighbouring properties and harm to amenity. Furthermore, harm to amenity could arise even if there is effective control due to the frequent turnover of guests. The proposed intensification of use and movements would adversely impact the amenity of neighbouring residents within the host building and would alter the existing residential character of this part of Breadalbane Terrace and the surrounding predominantly residential area. Because the high turnover of guests is likely to be higher than typical private rented or owner-occupied accommodation, this could have an impact on noise and disturbance to neighbours. Whereas such impacts may be offset in town centre or mixed-use areas, the same cannot be said for this building, which comprises a number of residential flats within a residential block. Whilst there is a hotel located to the west and an allocated employment area to the northeast, the building which the flat is located within is entirely residential in character and includes a shared stairwell which would be utilised by users of the STL and owner-occupiers of the neighbouring residential flats. The flat is also 3 bedrooms, which potentially gives rise to larger parties utilising the STL, which could have more scope for impact on the amenity of existing residential properties. And turning to the applicant's case, the following additional documents have been presented, including the grant of the full licence for secondary letting for short-term let, a letter from the Holiday Let Management Company, and a statement from the applicant. The statement from the applicant includes that number 4A has been operating as a short-term let since May 2024 and is managed and serviced by the Holiday Let Management Company Limited, who are named on the STL licence as the only ones permitted to carry out the day-to-day management of the premises. Whilst it's acknowledged that turnover of guests could at times be higher, but also at times considerably lower than typical private accommodation, the management company are responsible for ensuring that any issues are dealt with immediately, and the property is maintained and kept in good condition at all times. The assertion that the potential noise and disturbance to neighbours could be offset in a town centre or mixed-use area, but not in this building, as it comprises other residential flats, is somewhat unsubstantiated. Whilst it is recognised that the flat forms part of a larger building, which does have other residential flats, Breadalbane Terrace lies a mere 63 metres from the town centre and is on the main route through Aberfeldy, which encounters a steady stream of traffic, including this being a bus route, and can be very busy. To the north of the building, less than 60 metres from the back of the flat and can be clearly seen and heard from the property, is Aberfeldy Business Park, which is a thriving employment area comprising different businesses. Adjacent to the eastern boundary of the business park is Aberfeldy Caravan Park, which is another very busy operation comprising 164 pitches and accommodating a high number of visitors. In addition, the building lies next to the townhouse, which is a busy and popular guest house comprising bedrooms, an apartment for let and a restaurant. This business is not located within the town centre either. However, like for number 4A, it lies in very close proximity and is closely connected to it. The businesses surrounding number 4A already create a higher existing level of underlying noise and potential for disturbance. The assumption that any potential noise or disturbance impacts as a result of an STL can be offset in the town centre, but not out with, is not justified. Due to number 4A's position on a busy A road, close proximity to the town centre, and with existing nearby businesses, any noise or disturbance that may be created as a result of this proposal would be offset, a conclusion that would be reached if it was located a matter of metres to the west. Another short-term let application for a flat in a building with other residential properties was recently approved on Canoe Street in Perth. which, whilst a different and larger town, is located just out with the town centre. The officer took the view that whilst the property is on the other side of the road from an area which has been identified as part of the city centre, there are a clear mix of uses within the close vicinity of the property. The report of handling for 4A acknowledges that there are some mixed uses in the surrounding area, but concludes that this area is considered to be predominantly residential in character. However, it's argued that this is not the case. In terms of access, the main door to number 4A is accessed by walking through a pend in the building leading to a rear door, which provides access to the shared stairwell. This rear stairwell only provides access to number 4A on the first floor and numbers 4B and 4C on the second floor. Number 3 has its own main door on the front of the building. Visitors do not pass any other doorways of neighbouring residential properties to get to number 4A and would have no reason to come into contact with any other residential properties in this part of the building. Other short-term let applications have been approved in recent months with shared entrances and stairways. Whilst it is fully acknowledged that the circumstances of these applications are slightly different and they all lie within designated town centres, it raises the question of why the principle of a shared entrance or stairway for a short-term let is acceptable in these cases, which also have residential neighbours, but appears to be a concern for 4A just because it does not lie within the town centre boundary. In respect of the size of the property, it's acknowledged that being 3-bedroom is slightly larger. However, there is a need to provide a range of visitor accommodation in the area to cater for families and other small groups. Aberfeldy is a popular tourist town with a lot to offer visitors. The second consideration of PKC's guidance is whether a proposal relates to a property of 4 or more bedrooms. This suggests that properties of 4 or more bedrooms could be considered of greater risk for impacting local amenity from noise or disturbance. However, being a 3-bedroom property, number 4A is below this, and whilst it has capacity, the occupancy rates show that it is very rarely occupied by 6 people. In terms of loss of residential accommodation versus economic benefit, the flat had been sale for over 6 months prior to the current owner purchasing it, illustrating that there was limited demand for the property. As set out, the Council is satisfied that the use of 4A as an STL would not have a significant impact on the availability of residential accommodation. In terms of character and visual amenity, in the absence of further detail as to why this proposal could adversely affect the character of the conservation area, despite being in very close proximity to the town centre, it is reasonable to conclude that it would not affect either the listed building or the wider conservation area. And just in terms of other matters, there was one letter of objection received, which raised concerns regarding the impact the change would have on residential amenity, and that the loss of the flat to an STL would put pressure on the balance of supply and demand of properties in Highland Perthshire. And there were no issues raised by any consultees. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And we'll move on to questions. Bailey McLaren.
Thank you, convener. I don't actually have any questions.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, convener. I have 2 questions. It's suggested that there might be a limit of 6 people. Is that actually the case? And do we also have a limit on the number of cars that would be taken up as a consequence?
Thank you, Councillor Allen. No, I mean, I think it's a 3-bed property. The assumption is two people per room. I mean, it hasn't actually been said in black and white. You know, there would potentially be a sofa bed perhaps in the living room, so you could have 8. But the license will probably dictate, if you like, the number of people that should be using the property. And in terms of cars, no, there's no limit. You know, it depends how many people are arriving and how many cars are coming in. But I suppose it's down to the fact there's no dedicated parking for the property anyway. They would have to use the on-street parking available. And but just to note, Roads didn't have any concerns about that.
Thank you, Convener. Just to kind of direct you to page 155 of your papers, Mrs. Tierney almost said it, but the short-term let licence on page 155, the front page indicates a maximum of 6 guests. Obviously, that doesn't deal with the parking, but it does say 6 guests.
And my second point, I don't know if you can answer this, I'm just asking it anyway, but given as a guidance that there was a limited demand for the property because it took 6 months to sell, that can be fairly questionable if the vendor happens to have overpriced the property and won't move until that number is reached. Is there anything they can share there?
No, I would agree with you. Absolutely, there could be any number of reasons why the property has not sold within a given period of time.
I too have 2 questions linked together. First of all, the appeal, the Burnham appeal, which is mentioned briefly by both the applicant's agent and in the papers, that is a material consideration still, I presume.
Yeah, I mean, every application has to be considered on its own merits, Convener, but there can be any number of material considerations, and that appeal decision has been taken into account in making decisions on other appeals by the LRB as a material consideration.
Thank you. And the other point I wanted to raise was several examples the agent actually mentions within the report, and they do acknowledge that they are all slightly different. I think the ones in Pitlochry were closer to the town centre than this, from memory. But the one that I specifically wanted to ask about was Donnelly House in Aberfeldy. I recall that was empty at the time. It was never been used as a residential property. Is that correct?
Yes, it was being brought back into use. Mm-hmm.
Fine. Given there's no further questions, members, can we now proceed? Members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Allen?
I'm happy to determine.
And Bailey McLaren?
Happy to proceed.
Fine, and I too am happy to proceed. So, Councillor Allen, if you could start us off on this one.
I'm happy to go with the proposal of the officer and refuse the application.
Okay, I'll come in next. Short-term let applications for flats are always difficult to assess. The core of everything, in my mind, is the residential amenity that exists within in the block. This is obviously a residential property, and the existence of a short-term let does mean there's a commercial operation within that residential area. The Burnham appeal, which I mentioned, raises several points. That any tourism must be compatible with the amenity and character of the area. And although there may be no objections to application for a short-term let, the impact on the amenity is not limited to recording of antisocial statements. The movement is an issue, of course. Obviously, people are coming and going, changing over occupancy of the property, luggage, vehicle movements, but that can affect, and the intensification of the movement can obviously adversely affect the amenity of the building. And harm can be given to the amenity, even if there's an effective management control in place. And as I mentioned, the introduction of short-term let would alter and can alter the character of a private residential area. This is a particularly difficult one because it isn't that far away from the town centre. But having reviewed it on balance, I'm of the opinion to refuse the appeal. I feel that this situation would affect the amenity of the residential block. I appreciate that it's a separate entrance, but there are other flats working from that entrance. So my feeling is to refuse. I know also, of course, there is a licence already in place, but of course that's subject to a different committee and not a planning issue. So my decision, as I said, is to refuse the appeal. Bailey McLaren.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, this has been interesting appeal, and as you say, they're no two are the same. And yes, I do recall the Burnham appeal. And it is, yes, residential amenity is of vital importance and sustainable tourism. I am agreeing with the officers, and I too would uphold their decision for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous decision again. Just as a quick point, and I'll subject to your thoughts. In the reasons for refusal, number 1, item 2 is mentioned, but there's nothing in the report of handling to suggest that there's a problem. So I'm just wondering whether we should delete that reason for refusals. That's part 2 of reason number 1.
Yes, Convener. Yes, unanimously agreed to refuse, and what you're raising is an issue is whether you delete ground of refusal 1, it's policy 30E2, and delete that reference. And all I can say is, yes, I do recall the report handling saying that because there was no short-term electoral area, that's something which was not contrary to policy. But it's a matter for yourselves whether you want to retain that or remove that. I think, Convener, are you proposing to remove that?
My proposal to move it, I'll ask my 2 colleagues.
Yes.
If they're happy. Yes. Yeah. My 2 colleagues concur, so we'll
That's agreed to remove that.
agree to remove.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So, members, we'll now move on to the 3rd item on the agenda. This is the 3rd and last of the new ones. This is item 4.3, which is the erection of a fence in retrospect at 117 Glenurn Road in Perth. Mrs. Tierney, if you could introduce for us.
Thank you, Convener. So we'll just run through some slides for the appeal. So the location of the appeal site denoted there with the yellow star, south side of Perth, kind of Friarton area, big Tesco superstore, busy roads in that area. Next slide. And then as we zoom in, you can see the main road, Glenurn Road, kind of cuts through the centre of the slide there. And Glenurn and Glenlyon Road, that crossroads there with the appeal site on the corner of Glenurn Road, which is a kind of a dual road, if you like, a service road for those properties along there. So it's on the end there. And then just kind of zooming in a bit more closely on the various junctions in that area, coming out of Glenurn Road onto Glenlyon Road and then onto the main Glenurn Road. Drawings that were submitted with the application. First one here, red line site boundary, just around the edge of the site there. And then as we look more closely at it, this is the before the development was carried out, in terms of the red line around the site. It's easier to see on the elevations, but existing kind of mesh, low mesh fence around the edge of the site. And then as proposed, we've got the existing fence at the rear of the site, new fences that are shown in green across the site there, and there are some down takings where the new fence would has been erected. Then these are the elevations. So the existing kind of mesh fence up to just under 1 metre in height around the edge of the site, and what has now been built, which still retains an element of that fence at the rear of the site, but coming round towards the side and the front of the property, a taller section of 1.8 metre high fencing, and then it drops down to again the lower section at the front there. This is so there were some roads development asked for some visibility drawings. So this is the pre-development based on the lower level mesh fencing that existed around the site. So you can see the visibility splay across the front of the site there, and then the as built The difference with this drawing being the lighter blue area in the kind of middle of the drawing there is the area where the 1.8 metre high fencing does obstruct the required visibility across that junction. These are some images that were in the appellant's papers, just for your information. There's no details of the exact location of these properties, but they're included to give you that additional information. And then we'll look at the site itself. So there's quite a few images to go through. This is the front of the appeal site with the lower fencing at the front of the property. And then again, this is as you just start looking across to the junction. And then this is looking back along Glen Earn Road, along the service road to the other residential properties. And then from within the front garden. Then this is from Glen Earn Road itself, so just a little bit further along the service road there, looking back towards the junction and the dwelling house and the low level fence at the front. And then this is just starting to come a little bit closer towards the junction. And then you can probably start seeing the configuration of the junction of the service road as it comes out, and then that then joining with Glen Earn Road. And again, this is just looking straight across that large junction. Looking from the other side of Glen Earn Road across to the appeal property, so you can see the low level fence at the front, an existing tree in the front of the property as well. And then starting to look back up Glen Earn Road, so you can see where the fence increases in height and joins the higher level fence, which also joins across to the wall of the dwelling house. And then you can see just at the rear view here now of the fence and closer up image of that fence. And then you can see there is a garage at the rear of the property with the what remains of the small mesh fence that would have existed along the whole boundary. And then looking from across the road, I suppose these are the more critical ones. This would be from the junction as you come out of Glen Earn Road, looking right up Glen Lyon Road, and the white lines on the road obviously are the delineation of the junction there. And as you look up Glen Earn Road, you can obviously see, well, you can't see until we move a little bit further forward. So there's another 2 images. So the next image is moving a little bit further forward of the junction. So you can see a bit further up Glen Lyon Road. And then one more, you've got to be quite a bit further forward of the white lines there until you can see further past the taller sections of fence there. And then this is just some images from the inside of the appellant's property. One of the points they raise is looking into a window on the side of the property. So this is that window on the gable. And then looking back from inside towards the boundary fence along the road from within the garden. And then as you start looking around towards the front, I suppose the best way of explaining it is where the Wendy house is there in the corner. That's really the offending corner that obstructs the visibility. And I think there's one more from the front garden. Yeah, so it's just as you come round. So you can see where it goes, the kind of section that joins between the low area and the taller area. And I will mention it obviously, but the low fence at the front of the property is it doesn't require planning permission. It's low enough that it would be permitted development. It's the taller parts of the fence that mean there's an application required. And obviously it's in retrospect because it does exist. So yes, the site is an end of terrace dwelling house situated in a residential area of Perth, and retrospective permission is sought for the erection of a vertical boarded timber fence along part of the southern boundary of the site. Some of the fence is less than 1 metre and is permitted development, and therefore the proposal only concerns the sections of the fence that exceed 1 metre in height. The areas of fence requiring permission are 1.95 metres tall, erected along the boundary of the house, adjacent to the pavement on Glen Lyon Road and running across to the house from the boundary. A tree to the rear side of the property has been removed and 1 tree remains in the front garden. The reason for refusal is the fence, by virtue of its height, design and proximity to the carriageway, is detrimental to the visibility of road users, especially drivers who are exiting the service road and joining the junction of Glen Lyon Road and Glen Earn Road. Approval would therefore be contrary to policy 60B-A of the Perth and Kinross LDP2, which requires development proposals to be designed for the safety of all road users. In terms of the assessment by the planning service, in terms of visual amenity, the fence is appropriate for this domestic setting, and there are fences of similar designs adjacent to pavements in the wider area. As such, the proposal does not have a detrimental impact on the character or environmental quality of the property or the surrounding area, and there is no detrimental impact on residential amenity. The fence has been erected to the west of the junction between a service road, which serves the houses on Glen Earn Road, and Glen Lyon Road, where it joins the main carriageway of Glen Earn Road. The required splay along Glen Lyon Road is 43 metres. Due to its height, design and proximity to the carriageway, the higher areas of fence significantly restrict the visibility to the west on what is already an awkward junction, and it's necessary to move forward of the white line to see adequately. In terms of the case for the applicant, the Glen Earn Service Road, which is a 30-mile-an-hour zone, is extensively used for parking by residents and local businesses, reducing the effective width of the driving area and naturally slowing traffic. Additionally, numerous speed bumps along the road further reduce vehicle speeds. The hatched area in front of the property is often used for parking by customers of a neighbouring home-based mechanic, and this results in several considerations. Firstly, that cars rarely travel at 30 miles an hour. They crawl along and stop at the junction, allowing ample time to see oncoming traffic. Secondly, visibility to the left when exiting Glen Earn Road Service Road is significantly reduced due to parking, so users are accustomed to these conditions and navigate safely. And thirdly, the lack of parking means they often have 2 cars in their own driveway, blocking the previously suggested view when approaching Glen Lyon Road. Additionally, similar fences are common in the area, particularly on corners, and are of the same height as the fence extending up to the junction. They have a ring doorbell which shows minimal use on the service road. The fence was primarily built to provide security and a safe area for the applicant's children to enjoy the garden. Previously, this side of the property was fully exposed, leading to numerous break-in attempts. The fence deters intruders, making it more difficult for them to enter the property. And additionally, it prevents people from looking directly into the house through a window facing the road. The fence also serves as a windbreak and sound barrier, significantly reducing noise from outside and creating a quieter environment inside the property. It helps keep the garden clean by reducing debris from surrounding industrial and retail properties. An alternative to the fence commonly used in this area is planting a hedge around the garden. However, this poses various risks and hazards and obstructs visibility for drivers exiting the road. Overgrown hedges can extend into the roadway, narrowing the space for vehicles and potentially causing damage, and can force pedestrians into the street, posing hazards, especially for children, the elderly, and those with disabilities. The fence is in keeping with the area and is built to a very high standard and well maintained, adding to the aesthetics of the area. There have been no accidents since the fence was erected, and people comment on how much nicer it looks. And as I showed you there, photos of various other similar fences and overgrown hedges have been submitted. The main point to note here in terms of other matters is the consultation from Transport Planning that noted that the southern boundary elevation details that the 1.95 metre high fence, although it slopes down to 0.95 metres on approach to the Glenern Junction, and it being subject to a speed limit of 30 miles an hour, in accordance with the standards outlined in Designing Streets, a visibility display of 43 metres by 1.05 metres, measured 2.4 metres back from the carriageway, is required to be demonstrated. And obviously, as we've seen in the drawings, that those drawings were submitted by the applicant, detailing the display from Glenern Road into Glenlyon Road, but that those demonstrate that the applicant is not able to achieve the 43 metre display as a result of the erection of the fence. There is one letter of objection raising concerns that the fence blocks the view of traffic coming down Glenlyon Road and that the fence may affect a right of access to another property, but obviously that's a civil legal matter. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll go to questions. Bailey McLaren.
The question I had was actually answered within the overview from Mrs. Tierney, so no.
And Councillor Allen.
Thank you, convener. It's half a question and half an answer, maybe. I like the fact that the owner has tried to tidy up the corner. It has made a big difference. However, clearly from the photographs we've seen, the view across the roads is it would certainly leave health and safety in question, especially for cars trying to turn right. But yeah,
Okay, fine. No question from Councillor Allen then. So, and I have no questions either on this one. So, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Bailey McLaren.
Happy to proceed.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure Councillor Owen, you're happy to proceed as well.
happy to proceed, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So Bailey McLaren, could you please start us off?
Thank you, convener. Yes, it is a busy junction and a bit more complicated than some other junctions, as has been pointed out to us. And also, you know, I note that some of the fence has been constructed falls within permitted development. But what's in question is that out with, and we cannot overlook what our road safety officers have said and stated, and we can't wait for an accident to prove otherwise. So therefore, I would agree with our officers and uphold their decision as stated in the papers.
Thank you, Councillor Allen.
Thank you, convener. I fear that I sold the jerseys when I asked the question that was actually my statement, so thank you.
Can I just clarify, Councillor, are you agreeing or?
I'm going to refuse the application, thank you.
Thank you very much. Leaves it with myself. Looking at the application, having visited the site, I can understand the thoughts of the applicant and what he's trying to do to secure the area, and to make obviously improve the noise effect as well. So I can see the point, but having tried to drive out of Glenern Road, and the visibility going up, looking up to Glenlyon Road is very difficult. I then also proceeded up Glenlyon Road myself and turned around and came back down again. And certainly the visibility of cars trying to exit Glenern Road is that part of Glenern Road is difficult. So I think in this instance, as Bailey McLaren has said, we have to consider road safety. And I think the reasons for refusal given by the officer are justified, and therefore I too am afraid I'm going to have to refuse the appeal. However, I would say that looking at the visibility displays which were put forward for us today, I think a solution is not too far away from this, but I'll leave that with the applicant and the officers. So once again, Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous decision to refuse on the reason given.
Yes, convener, unanimously. I don't hear any changes to the reason for refusal, which is page 205. So refused in line with the grounded refusal.
So members, that completes the new cases. We now have item 5.1, which was a deferral. This case came before us in November. At the time, we have the application for planning in front of us. There was a concurrent application for listed building consent to demolish buildings on the site. At that time, this was going forward, it had been refused by ourselves and was going forward for appeal to the Scottish Reporter, the DPEA. That result has come back to us and the appeal has been refused, but the planning application now comes back to us for consideration. So if I may pass it to Mrs. Tierney, this is the demolition of buildings and erection of 3 agricultural buildings, formation of hard standing and associated works at Castle Farm at Methven.
Thank you, convener. I will take some time to go through the various slides and information on this one because we have different members present. So, and I will run through the associated appeal decision for the listed building consent as well. So bear with me while I try and remember everything that I said before and add to it. So yes, the location of the appeal site there with the yellow star, so to the east of Methven, in proximity to Methven Castle. And then we start zooming in, again, Methven Castle there and the complex of buildings highlighted within the yellow circle there. And then we'll have some images of the buildings. Obviously structural surveys and so on submitted with the application that number and detail all the buildings and the various condition of those various bits and pieces. So this is an aerial shot, and just for clarity, it is the mainly historic elements of the steadings, the U-shaped and the infill courtyard areas that would be demolished. The 2 kind of portal frames on the left-hand side would remain as part of the application. So the red line application site boundary, which obviously runs all the way down to the main road and then runs around the complex of buildings. And then looking more closely at the red line around the buildings themselves. And then as we can see, the dotted red lines indicate the downtakings of the existing buildings, the 2 grey rectangles being the buildings that remain, and the kind of blue, green and yellow buildings in the middle are the new sheds that are proposed. And then this basically shows the information that was submitted with the structural information, as I said, so the various buildings highlighted for removal and numbered. And again, just the proposed plan, which shows the 3 new sheds in the centre of the site there. Some elevational drawings now of the various views of the proposed sheds, obviously agricultural in style, colours, materials and so on. And then the opposite side, the opposite views. And then we'll run to some photographs. So first one there looking from the main road across to Methven Castle and the application site where the yellow arrow shows the existing buildings behind the trees there. And then this is as we start looking towards the buildings from various angles. Eastern elevation. And then some of the modern kind of silos at the side there. And as we move round towards the entrance into the courtyard and the buildings. And then some images of various buildings within the courtyards, some of which are very agricultural in style, some of which are, old houses, jammers, etc. And then some of the dilapidation in some of the buildings, hayloft dormers kind of falling in and so on. Then as we move round into the courtyard, some of the other buildings. Some in better condition than others. This one's reasonably intact. And then we can move round to this. This is actually a little or large ducat in the middle of the site. Various infill within the buildings as well. And this is the back of the kind of the southern wing, I suppose. And then as you come around to the other side of that wing, on the southern side. And then some internal shots as far as you could go safely, I would say. And then these portal frame buildings at the rear that would remain. Another internal shot. And a final external shot. So we've kind of gone full circle around the outside and through the centre. So yeah, Castle Farm, a steading complex located approximately 100 metres northeast of Medvin Castle. A complex of barns, byres, stables, cart and storage sheds and a ducat laid out in a courtyard arrangement. Medvin Castle is A-listed. The Castle Farm is not listed in its own right, but is Curtilage A listed. The site also sits within the Perth Green Belt, Medvin Castle Historic Garden and Designed Landscape, and the Tay Catchment SAC, and a core path is located along the access track to the north of the site. The proposal seeks to demolish all the buildings in the complex, apart from the two more modern portal-framed agricultural buildings, and replace these with 3 new agricultural sheds, a grain store, a cattle shed, and a general purpose shed. 2 reasons for refusal. Firstly, the proposals, which would include the demolition of the Category A curtilage listed steading complex, is contrary to MPF 4, Policy 7B, Historic Assets and Places, and Policy 28A of the Perth and Kinross LDP, which seeks to preserve the character, special architectural or historic interest of listed buildings. Furthermore, it is considered that it has not been adequately demonstrated that this is the only suitable site for the replacement buildings, which would have a reduced impact on the setting of the Category A listed castle and its associated designed landscape. And secondly, the proposal is contrary to Policy 14, Design Quality and Place of MPF 4, and Policy 1A, Placemaking of the Perth and Kinross LDP, as it would not contribute positively to the quality of the surrounding built and natural environment and associated landscape character in the vicinity of Medvin Castle by virtue of the siting, scale and appearance of the buildings proposed. So in terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, while the general principle of erecting agricultural buildings is acceptable, the site is located within the Perth Greenbelt, where it must be demonstrated that the proposal is essential for agriculture and that the proposal protects and enhances the character and landscape setting of the area, which is a particularly important factor on this site given the location within a historic garden and design landscape, and that the curtilage listing of the buildings. The site has a well-established agricultural use. However, this is within a low-level, limited-scale building, which appears to sit as a subservient estate building when considered in relation to the listed Medvin Castle and the wider designed landscape. It's not considered that the justification for this demolition is appropriate, and there are concerns regarding the impact the loss of the steading would have on the castle and the landscape. Historic Environment Scotland have considered the proposal in respect to the setting of the castle and the landscape. The preference would be to retain and repair the existing steading, as it is an important feature within the landscape and makes a positive contribution to the setting of the castle. However, whilst the proposals would have an adverse impact on these heritage assets, The submitted visualisations show that a level of potential impact does not reach a level that raises issues of national importance. Nonetheless, it is considered that alternative siting of the proposed buildings elsewhere within the control of the applicant would result in considerable betterment in comparison to the submission. The applicant was advised that further consideration was required into the repair and reuse of the steading. There is no indication of what detailed alternatives to the current proposal have been considered, including the investigation of siting the buildings elsewhere within their control. The proposed development will be significantly larger in both scale and height than the existing steadings, extending to 13.7 metres in height and 60 and 36 metres in length. No justification has been submitted for the proposed height of the grain store, being substantially taller than the cattle and general storage sheds proposed and much larger than the existing structures. The proposed grain dryer would only operate once a year for a period of up to 14 days, and the noise impact is confined to the summer when the machinery becomes active. A condition to control plant noise is recommended by Environmental Health. The proposed operation on the site is the requirement to house cattle during the winter months and at calving time. So in terms of the applicant's case, the site includes a range of traditional and non-traditional agricultural buildings and 3 grain silos. All the buildings are leased to a long-term agricultural tenant. This tenant will no longer be able to benefit from other sheds nearby due to their location as part of the MU73 Almond Valley LDP residential allocation, and they urgently require alternative farm buildings. However, the buildings as existing at Castle Farm are inappropriate for modern-day agricultural practices. The steadings have been challenging to maintain over the years, especially as they are no longer in economic use. It has been demonstrated that it is unviable to convert and reuse these buildings. As a result of the location of the buildings, which remain at the heart of the farming operation, they are not suitable for any alternative uses or sale. The farming business concerns arable production, cereal crops, as well as a small area of permanent grassland pasture covering 220 hectares. There are also 70 breeding cows and calves raised and sold. And there is a requirement for grain storage to allow the farmer to store grain in the shed up to the point of sale. This allows farmers to achieve the best price for their produce and to sell at the correct time. The new buildings will house 180 livestock and associated storage. The new buildings are situated adjacent to residential properties on the farm, 2 of which are unoccupied and the other is occupied by a farm worker. The location is very central to the wider farming area, and there are well-established transport links for large machinery and goods vehicles to access the site. The condition of the buildings is a risk due to their proximity to the core path. The proposal involves the demolition of derelict farm buildings and their replacement with new agricultural buildings to allow the farm to operate more efficiently, therefore contributing to the economy of the local area. The new buildings are located on an existing brownfield site and not on high-quality greenfield or agricultural land. The existing steading area provides the ideal location for the new buildings, as it is central to the farming operations and it is in an area with an existing development. The site has been subject to farming operations historically, and therefore it is a suitable location to continue to run a farming business from. The replacement sheds have an agricultural character which fits in with the area. With regard to Policy 9, brownfield, vacant and derelict land and empty buildings, this promotes the sustainable reuse of brownfield land. The redevelopment of this site prevents the use of a greenfield site elsewhere on the land holding. While there is a presumption against demolition and that buildings are reused taking into account their suitability for conversion to other uses, the structural condition assessment concluded that the current buildings are unviable to convert and therefore reuse is not feasible and demolition is the only option. If the buildings are not removed, they will continue to degrade and become more unsafe, creating a site that becomes more visually unpleasant as time goes on. With regard to Policy 7, historic assets and places, Medvin Castle is 100 metres to the southwest of the site. Development proposals affecting the setting of listed buildings should preserve their character and architectural or historic asset. The distance of the castle from the site and the natural landscape characteristics such as tree covering, topography, This separates the two sites physically and visually, which prevents the proposal from having an impact on the setting of the castle. With regard to the design landscape, the demolition and replacement of the buildings will improve the visual amenity and overall appearance of the designation and have no negative impact on it. With regard to Greenbelt, this is a development associated with agriculture and is therefore acceptable. While the replacement buildings are bigger in scale, the visualizations show they will have no impact on the wider character of the area. With regard to Policy 27 listed buildings, the steading proposed to be demolished is not listed in its own right. However, Policy 27 is relevant due to the proximity of Medvin Castle, which is A-listed. The proposal is sensitive to the listed building and the landscape through subtle design and siting, and the current dilapidated buildings degrade the special qualities of the castle. The replacements will rejuvenate an unsightly site and improve the visual amenity of the whole area. The proposal will not have a significant impact on the climate and biodiversity crisis due to its small-scale nature. In terms of other matters, Historic Environment Scotland would prefer the retention and repair of the existing steading because it is an important feature of the designed landscape and contributes positively to the castle setting. However, while they consider the proposals would have adverse impacts on these assets, the visualisations show that the level of potential impact does not reach a level that raises issues of national importance, and they do not object to this element, and the matter of demolition is covered in the accompanying listed building consent. Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust object due to the loss of the historic steading, and 2 representations were received, both in support of the proposal. However, they did raise concerns about access to the core path and the poor state of repair and ongoing maintenance of the access road. So to clarify now in terms of the DPA-EA appeal decision for the associated listed building consent, the reporter's decision letter noted that Policy 7B of MPF4 does not support demolition except where exceptional circumstances are demonstrated and reasonable effort has been made to retain, reuse and/or adapt the building. And there are 4 considerations set out to demonstrate this. Firstly, is the building no longer of special interest? Secondly, is the building incapable of physical repair and reuse? Thirdly, repair is not economically viable and adequate marketing for a reasonable period has been undertaken. And finally, is demolition essential to deliver significant benefits to economic growth or the community? With regard to point 1, the reporter notes that given the complete demolition is proposed, this would be a significant impact on the steading. The reporter agrees with the council that an assessment of the impact based on an understanding of the cultural significance of the steading and/or the place has not been provided, contrary to MPF4 Policy 7A. The reporter agrees with the council and HES and finds that the steading remains of special interest, in particular the older buildings that create the most historic character. With regard to point 2, the reporter finds that the evidence does not clearly demonstrate that most of the buildings are incapable of meaningful physical repair. The agent's letter to the council dated the 18th of April 2024 presents professional advice about alternative uses. This does not clearly demonstrate that the buildings are incapable of physical reuse. With regard to point 3, the structural assessment opinion that repair is not economically viable is contested by the council and HES, who seek a fuller breakdown of costs as well as current and projected values. Furthermore, the evidence has not demonstrated that it is not possible to mitigate the impact of alternative uses on farm operations. Notwithstanding the indicative nature of the costings and values given, the residential scenario suggests that there may not be a conservation deficit for residential use. Insufficient evidence is available to the reporter to form a view on the likelihood of a conservation deficit for commercial use. The alternative scenarios presented have not been tested through marketing activities that would establish if there is a restoring purchaser. The reporter does not consider the need for this is overcome by the professional advice provided about the alternatives. The appellant has not taken all reasonable efforts to adequately demonstrate that it would not be economically viable to repair some or all of the buildings and that no alternative use can be found. And with regard to the final point, the appellant says that the demolition and new agricultural buildings support the farm's viability and contribution to the local economy, referring to MPF 4 Policy 29 on rural diversification, which supports development contributing to farm viability. The appellant also highlights the health and safety risk identified by the structural assessment. The reporter finds that the submissions do not clearly demonstrate a significant economic benefit beyond the farm operation, and the reporter finds the evidence does not demonstrate the demolition would provide significant economic or community benefits. Overall, the reporter finds that the evidence is not sufficient to demonstrate exceptional circumstances for demolition under any of the above 4 considerations. Finally, the reporter notes that while the current state of the appeal buildings does to some extent detract from the setting of Methven Castle when viewed from the north and east, this is mitigated by the largely intact roofs of buildings at the edge of the Stedding group. From other directions, the steadings are partially screened by trees and buildings that are not part of the proposal. The reporter finds that the setting of Methven Castle would not be so significantly visually improved by the demolition to justify overturning their conclusion on the 4 considerations. In response to the dismissed appeal, the Planning Service has commented that the reporter concluded that they find exceptional circumstances for demolition of the steading have not been adequately demonstrated and that its demolition would not preserve the listed building or its setting. The planning application, which is currently with the local review body for the erection of 3 agricultural buildings, relies on the demolition of the curtilage listed steading buildings to accommodate the development. As listed building consent for the demolition of the steading buildings has been refused, it is not possible to develop the agricultural sheds as proposed. And finally, in response to the appeal decision and the comments of the Planning Service, the appellant has further commented that the dismissal is disappointing and it is frustrating because the applicant lacks a right of reply to the report's errors and misunderstandings. The inability to replace essential equipment has significantly impacted the tenant's family farming business during a challenging agricultural transition. The buildings are considered liabilities and dangerous to those around them. The notion of restoring them while meeting modern animal health and veterinary requirements is unrealistic and shows a lack of understanding of stock handling and farming practices. We can say with a high degree that the building will continue to decline and will be a significant risk to the tenant, his family and the general public. There is no economic use for these buildings nor any economic viable alternative. We clarified in applications and appeal statements that the temporary building use at another location is being taken back to facilitate a significant Perth local development plan allocation at Almond Valley, that the applicant explored options to retain the historic buildings but found none, so they'll inevitably degrade as no viable alternatives exist, and that the new farm building site is appropriate given the agricultural setting, designed and scaled to fit the area's character and to meet today's farming needs. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That was quite a long explanation. Well done. Excuse me. We'll go on to questions. If I may start off on this, is to clarify the situation with the DPEA decision. Now, obviously, they've refused consent to demolish the buildings. So my question is, how can I put it? Our decision, we're looking at planning overall, that's the demolition and the rebuilding of new sheds. Our decision, I hate to use the word academic, but I'm assume whatever decision we come to, really, the fact they can't demolish anything means they can't proceed. I say the word academic is probably not the right word, but that's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, you are right, convener. In some respects, it is academic because they have been unsuccessful in securing listed building consent for the demolition. But you know, the application in front of you is for full planning permission for that demolition and for the erection of the new building. So it is a separate application. The same policy principles apply. You could come to a different decision to the reporter and uphold the appeal and grant planning permission to develop the site and demolish the buildings, but they would not be able to implement that permission because they do not have the listed building consent to go with it. Any number of scenarios could then play out, which I won't bore you with, but that's the current position.
So taking it a little bit further, the reporter raised various points which hadn't been proved, the economic viability, etc., etc. The procedure, logistics of the procedure now, they can't appeal, obviously, but can they formulate all the answers to those points and resubmit an appeal? Is that physically possible?
Yes, absolutely, convener. It's essentially 4 tests for demolition of listed buildings, and what the reporter is saying is they haven't provided enough. They've provided a lot of information with both applications, but they haven't answered those 4 questions. And I think what the reporter is basically saying is you need to go away and provide the answers to those questions before there would be any further consideration given to demolition. Of course, they could go away and do that. They can resubmit both applications in due course if they so wish.
Okay, thank you for that. And one other point is, I'm not sure if this would apply here because there's a tendency, but I've seemed to recall in the past when there is a listed structure within the curtilage of an owner, they're responsible for maintaining it. I'm not sure if that were the case here because they're the tenancy rather than the owner of the land. Am I on the wrong track there?
I mean, I don't know what the arrangement will be between the owner and the tenant. I suppose the bottom line, it is the owner's responsibility to maintain the buildings.
And so just one point following on from that, I think in the paperwork there was mention that to restore and repair the buildings it would be something in the region of £3 million plus, I think, somewhere in there.
Absolutely.
So I've got a question. Bailey McLaren, I'll let you have a go now.
I mean, thank you, convener. Again, you really sort of asked the detail that I was going to ask Mrs. Tierney with regard to how if decision A or decision B happens, what's the impact to the applicants? And the applicants in this instance are the owners. Yeah, the questions. So I know. So what I was coming to say is that, again, my question has been answered.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, convener. Maybe a bit of an odd one, I don't know. But given the extensive dereliction of the current site, and I'm only regarding that with reference to the photographs that you shared, is this site actually used?
From what I can see, yes, it is used to an extent, but an awful lot of it isn't used as well.
Okay, I mean, I do have a certain sympathy for the application, given that it looks like a fairly derelict site, and that it wants to replace all that with brand new buildings. But I do also have sympathy with the fact that there are some things in there that can be saved, and it looks like they haven't been regarded. So, well, if you allow me to finish, I'll tell you what, I'm not going to ask a question.
Certainly, Mr. Elliott.
Yes. Just a very, very technical point. Excuse lawyers' pedantry here, but you did say that the LBC, the reporter decision, could be appealed. Technically, that's not correct. There is a possibility of a statutory appeal on a point of law to the Court of Session within 6 weeks. And looking at the date was 27th November, so we seem to be beyond that. And there's nothing in the papers to indicate they've actually done that.
Right, members, have been upset, Councillor Allen. We'll be pleased if you have a question. No, okay, right. So members then, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Allen?
I'm happy to proceed.
And Bailey McLaren.
Happy to proceed.
So Bailey McLaren, could you start us off on this one?
Thank you. Yeah. Where do we start here? You know, modern farming practices, as is stated by the applicant, these buildings are not in any way suitable for the modern farming practices, particularly for animal usage, the health of animals, their requirements. So I can see all of that quite clearly. The buildings are in a poor state of repair. Who knows what the recent storm's done to them? And an economic use in an agricultural business for these would be almost impossible to identify, but as I said, has not been maybe fully identified. A farming business maybe does contribute economically if it's animal production within our local economy, but again, that's maybe not been set out well enough. But I am inclined to disagree with our officers and support the appeal.
Thank you for that. I think I've come in now, if I may. I agree with you. This is a difficult one, very difficult one, in as much that obviously the listed building consent has been refused, and how this, of course, can't overturn that. The listed building consent, the buildings themselves are not listed; they are just within the curtilage of an A-listed building. When we hear people talk about it being a listed steading, it implies that it is in some sort of good repairs, good or partial disrepair. But having visited the site back in November, these buildings are effectively a ruin, really, and we are trying to protect a ruin. We've just gone through a major storm. I suspect there may be further damage now, although I haven't seen it, but I suspect with a storm like that and the buildings in the state they were, I would suspect that there has been further damage to them. So when we talk about protecting a steading, we're actually protecting a ruin, and that will deteriorate even more, because I suspect, I'm not sure who would be responsible for repairing it, but look at farming, it's not a big profitable business. Many farmers are lucky to break even. There probably isn't the funding to raise 3 million, I think, which is quoted in the papers, to actually restore them to good use. I did meet the farmers when I went to the visit. I mean, a long chat. I had a good walk around myself. I've mentioned the possibility of perhaps converting them into some sort of holiday houses, but of course, if you did that, yes, it would cost money to do it, and you would have no space for your agricultural needs. Farming, as I said, is a major part of the economy, and I don't want to get involved in that side of things, but this is a working farm, and it's not a museum. And it has its needs to maintain itself as a working farm. And it needs buildings which can be used for a working farm. Now, I know Historic Environment Scotland have said that whilst there will be an impact, it's not sufficient to cause a problem when they look at the visualizations. And I'm sure buildings such as this could be hidden with appropriate landscaping. So my thoughts here are to grant the appeal. I think it's a working farm. It's necessary to have buildings there. I don't agree that there should be a protection for what are buildings that are collapsing. I don't see the point of that. We can't go any further than that, of course. There's still obviously a decision by the DPA not to allow the buildings to be demolished. I'm sure in due course they can come up with the information that was required and may be able to proceed further with there. But as it stands at the moment, looking at it, I would be prepared to depart from normal policy, because I think there's a need for it, and I would grant the appeal. Councillor Adam.
Thank you, convener. And I'll now come back to my original point that wasn't a question. I do have an awful lot of sympathy for this application, because I think what we're looking at is a derelict site. And I think if we don't do something, it's just going to get worse. It's going to deteriorate, and it's certainly not conducive to modern day farming and allowing the farmer to work in a professional way. So I agree with everything that's been said. I'll keep it short and say I would agree with the appeal. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So, Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous decision to grant the appeal. Obviously, we're limited by the decision already made for the listed building consent for the demolition. But as it stands before us at the moment, we'd be happy to grant the appeal.
Okay, Convener. I think, Convener, what you said, unanimously, you have decided to grant the application. And Convener, you said that although contrary to policy, I think all three of you kind of listed reasons as to why. So although it's generally contrary to policy, or not specifically contrary to policy, I think what I have down here is because of the business operation as a farm on site, and the buildings already there are not really capable of use for modern farming, was the kind of two main reasons I had listed down. Yeah, okay, it's good.
Could I add that it was stated by the applicants that the need for new housing for their business was a large part to do with the loss of the buildings that are currently used within the Almond Valley project. And, you know, that's sort of I saw it's part of an
That's
economic
background.
validation.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the background to
reason.
that. That doesn't necessarily
It doesn't
justify
come in.
this particular site,
Right,
but you've
okay.
said, well, I think what it's kind of covered in the sense I've said the business operation of the farm on the site. You know, I know that there's a reason, the applicant has reasons as to why to move, but that's due to another development. And those were the two main factors that I had written down as to justifying contrary to policy.
Fine, thank you very much. That actually brings us to the end of today's meeting. It's been an interesting one, I'm sure everybody will agree, particularly the last one. Thank you everyone for your participation, and no doubt we will see you again in due course on the next one. Thank you very much.